everyone, I'm presenting to you from Canada today. My name is Kylie. I'm a second year PhD candidate at the University of Edinburgh, and my presentation is You're the How Done of the Family, translating lived experience of being mixed race to inform culturally sensitive understandings of neurodiversity in education. So before I go into talking to you about my story, I think it's important that I first define what is neurodiversity. So neurodiversity is the natural neurocognitive variation amongst the human species. This is a definition taken from an autistic philosopher by the name of Robert Chapman, based at Durham University. Under the neurodiversity paradigm, both neurological and behavioral differences, developmental and acquired, are valued aspects of human flourishing. By developmental, I could be referring to conditions such as autism and ADHD, and acquired can be PTSD, dementia, and so on. And the idea behind neuro-affirming research is, under this paradigm, we're advocating for a unique space within the social model of disability to support people who are being marginalized by neuronormative society. What I mean by this is that historically, and sadly still today, a lot of research conducted on neurodivergent people is conducted through what we would call a deficit model lens. This would look at the individuals as somehow lacking or broken or in need of a cure to be considered normal. However, neuro-affirming research instead posits that everyone is different, and that doesn't make us less. When we think about what neuro-affirming research can look like in education specifically, neuro-affirming research should seek to inform practices and policy which make schools a place where all staff and students feel not just accepted, but welcome, celebrated, and supported, no matter what their neurotype or profile of need. Neuro-affirming research should also address epistemic injustice and challenge normalizing practices. And a way that a lot of neurodivergent researchers see being the way forward to achieve this is via co-production and centering neurodivergent expertise. Like many paradigms in psychology and education, the neurodiversity paradigm is not without limitations. In particular, extensive contributions to understanding neurodiversity remain unrecognized and validated across regions, dialogues, and contexts that fall outside Western or global North scholarship. The pervasive and continuous domination of largely white academics and institutions has led to neurodiversity research being labeled as Eurocentric. However, because neurodiversity exists and neurodivergent people exist all over the planet, our understanding must go beyond culturally singular notions and validate the plurality of how people all over the world understand neurodiversity. So this is where I'm going to talk about how my lived experience has informed how I understand and contribute to neurodiversity research and education. I'm a third-generation Canadian. I am of white and Asian descent. My gongong and pawpaw immigrated from Malaysia to Toronto in the 1950s. I was often referred to as the How Done, or the good egg of the family, mainly for being quite introverted, studious, liking school, liking reading, but also being quite passive. So I found it really hard to stand up for myself and speak what was on my mind most of the time. And I think being labeled the How Done was actually quite fitting because the symbolism of an egg has always deeply resonated with me, being white Asian, but also being a person that lives with general anxiety disorder, which, according to the neurodiversity paradigm, suggests that I may also be neurodivergent myself, although I'm still personally coming to terms with whether I would want to adopt labeling myself as such. And I think connecting back to what does being a How Done mean, I think for me it always meant that I felt like I was walking on eggshells, always feeling like, am I good enough? Am I doing enough? Am I white enough? Am I Asian enough? Just all of these conflicting feelings with being biracial and the impact it had on my self-esteem and identity formation growing up. Thankfully, I had a very awesome social psychology lecturer at my bachelor's degree at UCL, and for one of the seminars, she gave us this paper to read, the Multicultural Identity Integration Scale, or the MULTIS, developing a comprehensive measure for configuring one's multiple cultural identities within the self. And I am not exaggerating when I say that reading this paper it did change my life because it spoke about how when people who hold multiple cultural identities, when they try to compartmentalize themselves into discrete categories, it actually does lead to poor self-esteem and poor mental health. Instead, if you can find a way to integrate all these parts of yourself, it leads to more positive outcomes for the rest of your life. So I put the icon of an egg cracking open because heavily inspired how I would then pursue doing research in psychology, developmental and educational psychology more specifically, and thinking about how when I look at people, when I experience life with other people, I need to see them for everything that they are, not just separate, isolated parts. Since my bachelor's degree, I've gone on to study and work with predominantly autistic people in mainstream, special, and third sector education. So for this next part of my presentation, I thought it would be interesting to show how autism is defined and understood in 3 different cultural contexts. The first one being Canada, and the definition I'm showing is how the Cree people in the prairies, so this is the middle 3 provinces of Canada, how they define autism. They define autism as e mekosit pitos e sewakawasit, which when we translate it to English means this person has been given the gift of moving and being different. And autistic people in these communities are often seen as spiritual advisors, spiritual guides, and they are shown the utmost respect and held in very high esteem. Moving on to how autism is defined in China, there are 2 definitions for autism in Chinese. The first one being 自闭症, which translated means self-enclosure disorder, or 孤独症, which is translated to lonely disorder. The country I'm showing is Japan, because this is a country where I've taught English to. Autism as understood in Japan is seen as more as an extreme version of social anxiety. So they define autism as jiheisho, social withdrawal, and in the most severe cases, it's called hikomori. So it's very fascinating how, again, all 3 of these cultural contexts are deemed collectivist. So it's wanting to do the best for the group. Conformity and wanting to blend in that pressure tends to be a lot stronger than in Western or global North contexts. And yet the language is very different. And the language and how autism is defined does impact how autistic people and neurodivergent people more widely are supported in education. Well, why does this all matter? Well, I personally think, as someone who has been brought up and educated in a Western context of what neurodiversity is, it's very important that if we are educating neurodivergent people from all over the world, from people whose backgrounds do not align with ours, that we take into account that they may be under different pressures than other people, and our way of educating and supporting them in education has to take these differences into account. And going back to Chapman, he thinks that defining what it means to be neurodivergent is a moving target. And I completely agree with this, because intersectional and holistic understanding is so crucial. And what it means to be neurotypical will heavily depend on the socio-cultural context you reside in. And there has been a lot of new emerging work that is specifically focusing on marginalized and underrepresented voices, which need to be amplified. Because historically, if I look at autism as a specific example again, a lot of previous research has only included white, male, speaking autistic individuals with no co-occurring challenges, needs, or disability. This gives us a very narrow understanding of actually what autism is and how we can support people who are autistic. So we need to make sure that we're capturing as many people that fall into these ways of being, as it were. And again, just touching on to how cultural values, such as whether you're from an individualistic or collectivistic culture, this significantly shapes stigma surrounding mental health, disability, and neurodiversity. So we need to have culturally sensitive research and culturally sensitive co-production that engages communities to engage in research that not only empowers them, but it actually aligns with what their priorities are. So we're not coming in as the researchers or educators seeking to extract knowledge or dictate what is the right way, what is the wrong way. We need to work in collaboration because at the end of the day, they are the experts on what it means to be themselves, and we need to be there to listen and learn from their expertise. It's also important to mention that some aspects of neurodivergent conditions are framed solely as not typical due to socio-cultural mechanisms and expectations. A common example that's been illuminated in the literature is autism and eye contact. Historically, a lot of researchers thought autistic people are incapable of maintaining eye contact with someone they're speaking with or engaging with socially. Now we know that it's not a case of capacity, it's actually the case of preference. Not everyone likes to maintain eye contact in social situations because it can actually feel very stressful. It could be a source of pressure and a source of burden. So now we're trying to think of it as, well, everyone has different ways of communicating in ways that they prefer. So how can we support those unique and nuanced ways of communicating? Another example would be regulating behaviors, colloquially known as stimming now. In the past, they were seen as disruptive, abnormal, not aesthetic looking, so we would want to extinguish those behaviors. Stimming behaviors can be anything from repeating words or sounds, tapping objects, flapping hands, and it would be very unique to the individual. Again, looking through the neurodiversity paradigm, we now know that stimming behaviors are actually a very positive source of self-regulation for the individual and can also enhance social communication and social bonding. So again, we're just needing to look at where our socio-cultural expectations are feeding into how we perceive and understand neurodiversity. That being said, other aspects are disabling beyond such socio-cultural mechanisms and expectations, and this disability will remain even if these are changed. So an example would be someone who has difficulty coordinating body movements. Whether the stigma, sociocultural expectations become more positive, they will still have challenges with coordinating their body movements. So not only does the support need to encourage changing perspectives, but we also need to realize that that isn't enough. We also need to make sure there are practical, logistical, concrete ways of supporting people as well. So when we think about what culturally sensitive understandings of neurodiversity can look like in education, obviously there is no one size that fits all. I think based off my experience of teaching a lot of neurodivergent people from backgrounds and experiences very different to mine, I think these 4 points have always been a good thing to keep in mind. So firstly, always assuming competence. We cannot assume that just because someone is autistic, has ADHD, or is dyslexic, will be incapable of doing things. So I'd like to think that we always meet them where they are, and then if there are things that they do need support with, this can be arranged in a participatory and empowering conversation or activity together. I also think that it needs to be informed by their strengths and preferences. I say child because most of the neurodivergent people I've worked with have been children and young people, but this also applies to adults or people who are older. I also think that we need to be safe spaces. Unfortunately, a lot of neurodivergent people have found it really challenging to access education, and as a result, many of them do not feel like education or school is a place that they necessarily feel like they belong and actually want to go to learn skills that can actually enhance their quality of life. So I think as the educators and researchers working in this space, we need to be safe. We need to show them that we are willing to listen without judgment, we are willing to take what they say seriously, and we are willing to implement it wherever we can. It's also important that we are challenging assumptions of the origins of the knowledge that we teach our students. And if they have any questions or want to discuss it, being able to have those conversations, because I think it will also foster very important skills of critical evaluation. which patients of students will need now more than ever, given the global and seismic shifts that are happening in terms of AI, climate change, persistent inequality as well. And finally, I think a lot of neurodivergent people, as outlined in the literature and just from my lived experience, learning how to regulate emotions in a world that isn't accepting of them is a very big, daunting task. But I think if we can foster socio-emotional learning that is inspired by what they feel and what they say helps and what they say doesn't help, learning how to regulate emotions is such a powerful, crucial skill that everyone, whether you're neurodivergent or not, will need to succeed and thrive in life. Reflecting on my journey, I think my research and the work that I've been able to do has only been enhanced by the fact that I'm able to fully embrace who I am, all different aspects, all different parts. And yeah, as I said earlier, I don't know if I would want to label myself as neurodivergent by virtue of being someone that lives with general anxiety, but I do see how my lived experience has helped me foster really strong and positive connections with neurodivergent people, not only in my personal life, but also in my professional life as well. So I like to look at this message from my pawpaw. One of the most beautiful things about my journey has been that I've been able to see the changes in her of how she understands the work that I do, how we can understand and better support members of our family better. And I think that is what it means to be a how done now to me. And she is the person that has helped me realize that, alongside the brilliant educators and the brilliant people I've had the pleasure to work alongside with in my journey so far. So yeah, I think this sums it up really nicely. That was my presentation. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions or would like to learn more, please send me an email or catch me on campus. I would be more than happy to talk to you about this topic. And yes, I would just like to extend my deepest thanks to the Interweaving Conference Committee for letting me submit an abstract and present from abroad, and just thank you for creating such a wonderful and warm space for early career researchers like myself to share our work. So thank you.